I'm Dave Trippin, and this is the Interstice podcast. Welcome back. So we got a lot to discuss. I've checked my emails recently as I was working on other things. Those continue to accumulate, and let's just say I'm humbled and impressed and appreciative of the amount of people that have written. So we're going to have a lot to discuss in terms of questions at the end of the podcast, and I'll use that as a segue to say thank you, first of all, for anybody who's tuning in on iTunes or Spotify, wherever that may be, or the channel. And if you want to get your questions answered on the podcast, the best way to do that is to write to davetrippinon@gmail.com, and we will get a discussion going on with your questions. And they can be Japan-centric, but ask me anything. I'm curious, any sort of observation you've had about life, and let's get it discussed here on the podcast. So a lot of the ruminations I've had recently, as I'm very excited, hugely excited right now about creative stuff. And I've thought it was interesting. I think as I look around, I'm considering the people that I respect and the things that seem to have influenced them in terms of creativity, because it's interesting to me because you only ever think of, usually when you look at an artist that you enjoy, that influences you, as the source, the eternal source, but it couldn't be farther from the truth. Everybody is taking their influences from somewhere, and it was particularly interesting to me in a sort of, we'll call it like a technological context, because I was considering now where it's become more and more that I can see how the things that influenced me is so much in my, like, the way that I view creativity, the way that I view art, are starting to actually get a few years on them now. And they're actually like, they're in, I guess you would say, aside from like the ardent enthusiast, they're in mediums now that people no longer use. So the one that I want to talk about first, which is it's just like warm for the darkness of the material, the warmth that it brings to me when I think about it is incredible, because it's like associated with my dad and great memories to do with that. And that is Pink Floyd's The Wall. And when I think now of like the imagery in that and how incredible it is, yet this was released on a VHS format, I think about, like, and when I think of them too, it's kind of like when I was getting into them, I suppose I was probably, it was around like 1992. So I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. My dad had, record player, was always playing The Wall. There were other albums, but of what they've created, of their body of work, that's the one that's most significant to me. I've come to appreciate like other songs that they've done from other albums, but that one just so speaks to me, and the art in it, like I think something that I would love to do. I've seen a creator that I respect, and I think a lot of people respect on YouTube for his cinematography, for his editing skills, is Colder, or Sam Colder. And one of his recent videos that I thought was incredible, it's like, I feel as though Sam Colder is able to like transcend a line where he might be considered or easily discounted by a sort of like, call it like an elite sort of the ugly people, you might say, because let's face it, the dude's like this ripped, shredded, young, hot dude, like that half of his videos are him doing, backflips. Some of his earliest videos, I've looked at them, in fact, they are him doing slow-mo backflips. It kind of speaks to this. It'd be easy to hate on where you're like, I'm a pure artist and he's just this sort of like cheap clicks, like, probably rich, that's how he travels so much, beautiful person, he doesn't understand true art is suffering. This will all lead back to Pink Floyd, actually, believe it or not. It all circles back, it dovetails nicely. As they say, one of his most recent videos, well, I consider it recent. It's amazing how quickly things become passed away and old nowadays, but it's still recent, especially to be considered so for the amount of work that has gone into this thing. Was, I think it's either like The Story of My Life or Hey So-and-so, which is his brother. And it's the story about how it's a very genuine, vulnerable story of how he lost his brother, I think, at, I don't know if it was an early age, but he had a great relationship with his brother and he lost his brother. And one side of you thinks that, oh, this is exploitation to exploit suffering, but it's totally not. And I think the voice is like, it's good to have that voice in ourselves that says, don't exploit suffering for popularity or for fame. But I think if you look for 2 seconds more closely at the work of art that he created there, I mean, first of all, yes, it's got the same usual, like, good Lord, holy hell, this guy's ability to edit is off the charts. And a lot of it is understanding a sort of flow between shots that isn't even necessarily, it's not fancy effects, it's that planned shots or seeing motion between shots, he's able to link them together in a really creative way. Of course, there's a lot to do with masking that's allowing him to make those incredibly smooth. It's at a higher level, so on and so forth. But great composition of joining shots, not just a single shot in itself. And I can feel it when he does this, that like you don't put that much effort into your art if you were doing it in an exploitative way. And it's incredibly touching. And one of the things that he does in this video, which I love, is a mixing of animation with video, where at the beginning, I believe it's that there's this door in the desert, and when he passes through this door, it's animated. And this is some collaborative work that he's done with this animator, with this artist, to be able to link these two things together. And it struck me, I don't know if he's ever been influenced by The Wall or Pink Floyd. And it's not also the first time. I mean, we have examples of melding together both animation and true video throughout history. I mean, a classic example is kind of like the dark comedy, although you don't realize it until you watch it when you're a bit older, is like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which is awesome. Just an incredible, wicked movie. So good. They mix it there, but they mix it as well. I think the first time that I ever saw it mixed when I was younger was when I saw The Wall. And there's so much, I think maybe why I connect with it is this sort of like Catcher in the Rye, that kind of feeling. Like you're growing up, you feel like an outsider is all, I think there's this awkward point in our mental development which necessarily outsiders us. We can't help but feel that way. I think it's something to do with once you reach a certain level of introspection, where that's sort of like leaving the garden, so to speak, where when you're a child and you're not so introspective, that's why you're innocent, is because you're oblivious to your own flaws. Whereas when you get a little bit older, then you become more self-analytical. And it's that higher, because you can be self-analytical, it makes you generally just more analytical in the first place. And it means that you can see in yourself your flaws. And when you see yourself, the flaws in yourself, then you look at yourself like others looking at you. And you're finally capable of probably not only like judging others in a more critical way, but of course that discerning intellect turned back on yourself can be a horrifying thing. And so The Wall, yes. I love The Wall because like it's this story of alienation at that time in life with, I mean, it's cool because it's like, it's this made up story. But I think I'm quite certain like John Waters or whatever, and I think this like related to his life. So although it's a made up character, you know, that classic, there's some truth in your fiction and some fiction in your truth, that kind of idea. And I've always loved history because I always loved stories. And here in this video was such a like graphic rendering of the concepts of loss from the First World War, shown in such a way that I think could be described as nothing other than truly, utterly beautiful. Like there's so many standout images in this. For example, there's one point with the, and I mean, obviously this composition of like joining both the incredible music. I mean, it's like, I guess that's why these ideas work so well. Maybe there'll be a resurgence of this because it's such an incredible medium to tell a musical story, is that it's just that. It's not only like that you have these incredible music videos that you watch, but because they took the time, because it is this opera, whatever you want to call it, that they can tell a full narrative and develop those ideas. And there's one point, I can't remember specifically what song is playing when it occurs. It might have been actually, you know what? I think it's actually Goodbye Blue Sky. That's what I would say. And it shows this rendering of did you see the falling bombs? The flames are all long gone, but the pain lingers on. That's the line, I'm pretty sure. Goodbye Blue Sky. Goodbye Blue Sky. That's it. And it's the British flag. And the British flag is shown, and then slowly as the song is playing, all the geometrical shapes that compose the flag start to fall away until it forms a cross. And then there's just like the red of the flag that's left that starts to like bleed down the cross. I was like, whoa, just talking about it now, you know, it gets like my heart racing, where I was like, wow, that is what an incredible symbol of like loss as it relates to country. And I love the music of it so much. But the thing that really struck me now when I was looking back on this is I was thinking of it in the context of VHS. And I feel like that's starting to become akin to if you looked, or if you talked to a comedian or a director and they were to talk about films from kind of like the bygone, I don't know, you maybe call it the golden era of Hollywood or whatever, and there'd be like black and white, and how insanely dated that seems to people now. But I was like, you know what? The Wall is probably insanely dated, but it reminds me of a concept, or like an idea that's important to me. It's this idea that it is not necessarily true that because something is new, something is good. There's a lot that has come and gone that is good. I mean, I took that from, I've mentioned it a bunch of times on the podcast and other places. Like I read Meditations, and one of the things that struck me, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, is that this was 2,000 years ago, and there is equal value in what he had wrote then as there is now to read that. And it kind of inspired in me this thought of, maybe I'm really missing out on some well, I would call it long ago, given my relative experience, but long past their point of popularity media, you know? So I like think of The Wall, but I was like, maybe I should explore some of these black and white movies, or maybe I should go back and get like better acquainted with you know, some music from the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s. I used to love, to be fair, actually, it's not like I am totally uneducated in that realm. My parents got me a radio. Whoa, jeez, talk about creative influences being old. I listened to like a Stanley Cup Finals. I'm not even into hockey, but I listened to that when I was young, and there really was some magic to it, like really cool, imaginative stuff when you sit there and listen to it. But I'm getting a little bit sidetracked because that was so cool. Yeah, going back and checking out these older media formats and appreciating something in them, I think is something that I would like to do. Because who knows what I've missed, and like, for example, I feel as though if I'm going to say that I really, really appreciate something like film, I've never watched Citizen Kane before. I've never watched Metropolis. And I think what's important is kind of like this idea that I'm now already discussing, which is that there is so much that can be taken from those that who cares that it's old? It's still really, really amazing. And I think it creates like a thread of relatability. You see yourself, the more that you can see yourself as a part of a whole, and I think of like whether it's you know, a social community, a creative tradition, then you feel more grounded and you feel connected to wanting to continue something. And I suppose you see your place in it, which I don't know the word that I would apply to that even necessarily. Like, it's important. I don't know what it is. There's just something about, if you're going to do art, why not feel connected to the tradition of the art that you're doing in its whole context? Also, this is another idea that's coming to me now. You'd think that there's only things to learn from the cutting edge and new, but you never know what wisdom you will find in what's past. So I like to explore that as well. So there was one. That was the wall. I mean, I could easily dedicate a full hour to just talking about the wall, but we don't have a full hour just to talk about the wall. I'll probably return to it in another podcast, I'm realizing now. I wanted to also talk about something else that was, I guess it's this ongoing theme that we'll have through this thing. That's it is as relevant now as it was when I first saw it. The wall is that for me, like in terms of creative accomplishment, in terms of getting across what you want to do, whether you're a writer, whether you're a photographer, videographer, a musician, doesn't matter. These things still hold their weight. Or where I say a writer, that what I'll move on to now is the never-ending story. I saw somebody talking about the never-ending story. I can't remember, it was in an article or whatever else, and it was funny to me because they were talking about how they knew that they were getting older when finally the people in the never-ending story started to look younger. And I realized that too, because I do remember distinctly when I was younger that when I watched the never-ending story, I was like, yeah, that guy's like an adult. And Atreyu, the main character, I believe he's like 11. So, when I was watching that I was quite young. And there's so many things that you could talk about in the never-ending story, is being like emotionally impactful, great writing, really awesome, still holds up. But the most of all I love is the antagonist. And the antagonist is, I guess it's kind of twofold. And I mean, I hope you go and you should Google this, YouTube this afterwards to watch this speech, because I watch it, a couple times a year just because I so love it. And it still strikes me as so powerful. I think some awesome, actually, I'm gonna hold that thought in my head, because I might steal that to do some like sound overlay in one of my videos because it'll be cool. The antagonist in that is, and I feel like maybe this is creating this perfect circle of conversation now as I'm talking about like what inspires you, feeling connected to a tradition, what keeps you going. The antagonist in the never-ending story is the nothing. And you're and it was so like incomprehensible, inscrutable when I was young, but like there was just such a perfectly conveyed dread throughout that movie. I think you'll find if you watch it now, like, wow, there's like, it conveys like fear and loathing and dread better than like movies with far more graphic representations of these themes. There was just something about its execution that was so good. And a lot of the movies at that time, I believe it was a movie from the 80s, but maybe it was like 80s, 90s. I think it was 80s. And not only the nothing, but it's the ultimate conversation that occurs in the movie at the end when Atreyu has to confront the agent of the nothing, the Gmork. And the Gmork, like, it stalks him the whole movie. It's always chasing after him. And I loved like the description to the agent of the nothing. I was like, that's so good. I was like, that in itself was enough of an awesome name to be like the perfect antagonist's lieutenant. And the fact that the antagonist is faceless, yet its presence is shown, kind of like the antagonist is, a lot of people say that like the world is the character, but it was like the anti-world character. But the conversation that Gmork has the agent of the nothing, this like massive black wolf with Atreyu at the end, and he says, "Well, what is the nothing?" You know, what he tries to get the Gmork to tell him what it is that like wants this to happen, and when the Gmork talks about it, I was thinking how it really was. I was like, it's like a symbol of what humanity deals with daily that would undo us, and kind of like what pulls us apart socially in our societies. And it's apathy, it's nihilism. And why does it want that? Like, why? And he was like, what's the point? Why does the nothingness want that? And the Gmork describes that the nothingness wants people to feel nothing, to not have dreams, because those who no longer dream, those who no longer have hope, are easiest to control. And I was just like, oh man, the shivers from this, where I was like, I mean, it's fantastic as, you know, a 7-year-old kid, but I was like, you could learn a lot from this movie as an adult. Probably the reason I'm discussing it now, why I like it so much. And kind of like this cautionary tale of like, yeah, don't dreams exist more than a thing to create a sort of like outlet for creativity. They're medicinal. Dreams are your armor against entropy, against throwing your hands up and saying, fuck it. It's not only that they give you something to do, it's that they prevent you from letting things fall apart. And I loved that theme, and I loved its influence on me, and there's no way around it now. The never-ending story is getting old, and as much as the value is still there, of as I say, the sort of like philosophical values of the discussion that occurs with the Gmork, the agent of the nothing, and Atreyu. If you watch it, it's good, and it's one of these movies that was using like the animatronics, which was so cool. Like I can only imagine how much it costs to like animate and have somebody like robot controlling the Gmork or whatever. But when the big fluffy it's like somebody was standing behind a curtain and they had this like big stuffed animal and they like threw it at Atreyu. So and he's like, oh, and he's like got this wrestling with this big, this big stuffed animal on him. And when he brings his hand up, because he was holding this like bladed stone, basically, that had chipped off of a rock to impale the beast, it's clearly ketchup. I don't think they really had a big blood budget at that time. And it would be such a tragedy, I think, to mistake the aging special effects with the message. Which is still so good. I absolutely love that movie. Love so much, particularly the that speech, conversation, dialogue at the end between the Gmork and Atreyu, and the other characters in it. Like such great symbols of melancholy in that movie as well. The rock biter. When he talks about these strong hands, and you're just like, I don't know. There was more character in these, like whatever puppets they were using than in some like major, like, what would you call it, blockbuster films now of real life people. There was so much, so many powerful performances from the puppets in that movie, which was incredible. The other thing, like, I wanted to relate this whole theme that I'm going on about now, is that just that idea, this is what I'll close off with this kind of concept that we're discussing, is that you look at the 1950s and you always think it's so quaint, but you've got to realize that what we are doing now, in less of a period of time, because everything is changing so rapidly, will seem so quaint within whatever next period of time, which it makes me laugh, because I think it's a humbling and kind of like self-deprecating reality that keeps you seeing the humor in the present moment, by seeing how never think that you're ahead of the curve, because kind of you're perpetually, well, I suppose it's kind of paradoxical. You are, of course, at the cutting edge, but that cutting edge will always fade into total like irrelevancy in terms of how dated and ridiculous it will seem at some point later. Much as you might look back on it fondly, that's inevitably what things become. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about, so that's like going back to creative influences that I've had, some inspiration that I felt to consider other people's creative influences that may predate my own. But then, more recently, I'm like, well, what's something that's really, really cool that I like, which is new and I find really compelling and very creative and quite original. And I found that, this is going to be a little bit meta here because we're going to have a podcast talking about a podcast. A podcast in a sense, actually. This is a Netflix original, but it is based from a podcast, or there's elements of podcastism that allow this to exist. So the name of this thing, and I'm actually gonna, I don't usually pull that up. I don't have somebody to pull anything up. Dave, pull that up. I want to find out the creator, because I kind of have like, oh no, it's not called that. What is it called? That's the name. It's called, now a few people, I wonder when you hear this, you'll be like, aha, yes, he's hip, he's cool. I'm watching that right now too, and it's interesting. It's called The Midnight Gospel. And this is created by Pendleton Ward and Duncan Trussell? Yeah, Duncan Trussell. And I want to recount the story of how this came to my attention. It's really weird. It is genuinely weird. So I had one friend talk to me about the Midnight Gospel. And then I had another friend. Both these guys, I really respect them, particularly in a creative way. These guys got their ear to the ground for like cool music, cool art, that kind of stuff. And they both mentioned it. And I was like, and they told me a little bit about it, but not in too much great detail, as to allow me to have my own first experience with it, which was great. But before I actually got down to watching it, just randomly, totally randomly, because these are not things I've clicked on. I suppose I've clicked comedians, and so that's why I may have had the algorithm feeding me a few more comedian suggestions. And here comes along this guy who starts to talk about psychedelic experiences. And I really love the way that he recounted it. And he talks about his experience at Golden Man. And I was like, it's cool. He really seemed to be like one of these introspective, psychonauts, explorers, that when I watched this comedian talking, I was like, oh, this is kind of a cool guy. And then lo and behold, when I go to start the Midnight Gospel, this same guy that I've randomly, out of nowhere, just been watching a few clips on YouTube recently, he's the guy, Duncan Trussell, that made the Midnight Gospel. So I was like, what is listening in through the airwaves? That said, I've been watching, I watch comedians quite a bit, actually. What is it? Dean Cole, I think that's his name. He's got a great new special on Netflix right now. I love Bill Murr. I love Dylan Moran. Of course, Dave Chappelle's the king. He's awesome. I don't like him as much, but I saw a bit of Cat Williams today. He's funny. He's funny too. I'll credit where it's due. A little bit of Chris Rock, Hannibal Buress. I like too. Little tangent before we continue with what exactly is the Midnight Gospel and why do I find it so creatively pioneering. I like when I read that I find one of the most incredible things about reading is to enjoy the individual voice of the person that it is that you're reading. And mark my words, we all have a voice. And it is one of the most profound, beautiful things in art. And it's very clear in writing because it's literally a voice. It's in your head. It becomes more abstract when you see somebody paint. In that case, it's often just called someone's style. But it happens. It's that part of ourself, however our atoms are arranged, however our brains have settled. When we go to do something, it will look like us. There's no way that we can avoid that. And it's awesome. I love it. And as you develop your craft, as you develop your skill, you see a more impressive expression of that voice. So you'll have it right away, but it only gets more and more incredible as you practice it. And I love seeing the voice that people have in comedy. Again, maybe people call it style, but it's every single person who goes up on stage is gonna have this different energy about them, a different way that they are funny. If they're not trying to emulate somebody else, it's okay to respect and have your influences, but it's still coming from you, coming from the heart. Then you're gonna have your style, and people will uniquely love you for that reason, which is really cool, and I really love that about comedy. So now we'll get back here to talk about the Midnight Gospel. So why this is so cool to me is, let me give you the basis. Let me give you the rundown. So what happens in the episodes? I've only watched 2 so far, but I think that gives me generally the gist of the show. So what it is it's quite psychedelic, kind of like in the tradition. This is somewhat like recreating a rehashing of like current trends in animation in the West, which is like not made to look particularly beautiful, kind of like low budget. But the edge here is that it's quite psychedelic, and there's this cosmic explorer, this like pink dude who's in this house, and in his house he has this device which it looks like, what does it look like? It looks like a pear sitting on the ground, but there's a slit down the middle through which he can put his head. But before he does that, there is a monitor, and on this monitor are a million different Earths, and he can swipe, and then it brings up more Earths, and he swipes, and each new screen is a new Earth. And what he does is he selects an Earth, and then he selects an avatar, and then he goes to that Earth, and this is, the idea of the multiverse, and he has a conversation with somebody down on that Earth. And it's fascinating. So what happens is, once he puts his head into the transmuting pear that his house, I think, is like floating in space. And what it does is he puts his head in the pear creates his avatar, and then it shoots him out the side of his house to whatever Earth it is that he's aimed at in the multiverse. And he arrives, and there is a story that is playing out when he arrives. So I don't want to actually spoil anything of the story, so you can go in and be like, oh, this is psychedelic, as Dave Trippin describes. So I won't say the specific stories, but what he's done, the creative idea that to me is totally original here, that I've not seen anywhere else, as far as I am aware, is that he has taken a podcast, one of these high budget podcasts where you have people other than yourself sitting there talking. Although Bill Burr does the one-man show, unless Nia comes around, so I'm in that vein currently. Nothing wrong with that, right? Duncan, he's having people to his podcast, and he's having guests on. They talk about interesting topics. Maybe it's a topic concerning like psychedelics. Maybe it's a topic concerning love, perhaps death. Anything is up for conversation, which is great. This is what is more human than a good conversation. But what he's done is he's taken those recorded conversations from his podcast, and then he's edited it. So this story that unfolds on the planet, the character that he meets is the person from his podcast, but the story that's unfolding is divorced from that podcast conversation. So what they do is they've edited in additional speech, points where it seems seamless, like they're having one conversation. They're not two separate things, and this one conversation is at the same time acknowledging this story that's occurring in the show that you're watching, but still touching on what it is that they're discussing when they had first sat down for the podcast. And there is some, what would you say? There is some parallels to the conversation that's occurring, and to the story that's unfolding. But it is quite some wizardry and creative thinking to me that you would have basically two separate things and make this attempt to create them as a whole. And to do so, I mean, the guy's a comedian, so there's like, yeah, there's a very humorous element to it. I will say it's it's adult. It's like you'd think of this as like an Adult Swim kind of cartoon for what happens in the animations and the stories. But it's not bleak. I mean, unless the conversations veer towards a subject that is, a little darker, a little bleaker, as will happen in conversation if you're taking on, more intense topics. I mean, I think in the second episode, they're discussing death. So, that's not something that it should not be all sunshine and rainbows, although you may find peace with that. But yeah, more to say, what I am interested in is how he's brought these two separate things and brought them together, and in a way that I have, as far as I know, I haven't seen anybody do before. So that was really, really, really cool. And I like to see like advancing the idea of what can anything be? There's always a great moment, a great concept. There's no limit to good ideas. Take a show like, who knew guys on YouTube were going to make a show about eating chicken wings that are hot and get progressively hotter and somehow become incredibly successful, getting like Kevin Hart. Well, anyone will go on that show that is like, you couldn't be more famous and you'll end up on Hot Wings. I mean, who do they have? Mirrors, Cry Me a River. Justin Timberlake, he was on there recently. Justin Timberlake was on Hot Ones. Now, props to the whole production. I mean, I think there's more magic in there than simply it's chicken wings getting hotter. The host is exceptional. They really are good at interviewing or like preparing a good interview, but really pushing the envelope there with like, what did you think was going to be a successful format? Well, apparently eating chicken wings can be so much more than just eating chicken wings. It can be a hit YouTube show. It's incredible. And it makes me think, not that I need to reinvent the wheel here on the podcast, but I like that. That's more fuel. That's more flames. That, hey, what could I do? What could you do? Who's listening? What's something that like you're interested in, but you want to like change the game? Another guy doing great work like that is, I think his is it Dave? Maybe I'm wrong. Probably wrong. It's Little Dicky. He's incredible. Such a really talented guy, and kind of an interesting story that he has too. That he like saved all his bar mitzvah money and he put it into making like a couple of YouTube videos. And to his credit, not that he needs any more, like the first one that he released exploded, but it should. But he was, all these people advancing the platform. I think it was Lemmy Freak, if you want a good laugh, and it's a good song. He does that. But I don't think, I think he wants to be considered more than a parody rapper. Definitely. It's more than just humor. Like he does, like Molly, that song that he's done, that's a fantastic song. That's really, really good. There's another artist that I just found like Instagram the other day where I was like, oh, holy shit, more random people. I try and break out of my bubble, find more music, find more artists, find recent music from artists that I haven't listened to for a while, that kind of thing. But this artist, her name was Halsey, and I'd never heard of her before. Again, maybe this is another moment where people are listening and saying, you don't know Halsey? What is wrong with you? But I didn't know who Halsey was. And it was great because she's another one of these examples where she was creating on social platforms like this and grew to be kind of like worldwide successful, has a half a dozen songs with near 100 million views on each of them. And this new generation, this new horizon of explosive creativity, I do not believe the sort of negative feeling that people have about like, oh, nobody can, become successful now because of the dilution of industries. I think it's more that there's such an upheaval right now in how you become successful in the niche that you love, where people were just getting used to their traditional paths. And now that that rug has been pulled out from underneath their feet, they're furious because now they got to reassess what they do. But as we know from neuroplasticity, you can teach an old dog new tricks. So I don't feel embittered about that. I'm excited by that. And things are only changing more rapidly. See, for example, the Canon R5, the market crippler, not wireless, mirrorless camera to compete with Sony finally, that can do 120 frames per second 4K for you video nerds out there like me. Ermagerd. That is an Ermagerd moment. Incredible what's going on with that. So now, as we do here on the Interstice, I'm going to get into the questions. We're going to do fast work here because, as I say, they piled up, and that's awesome. I really appreciate that, people sending in these questions. So let's hit it. Hi, Dave. I often see your videos. Only found your channel a year ago, but yeah, I'll try to see slowly all the backlog. Cool. I don't have a real plan of how or when, especially because I have to sell my apartment. Sell? You own an apartment? That's awesome. I'm 29 years old, that's great, software developer. I know that it may sound super shallow and too general thing to ask, but what should I do to seriously prepare myself, and which kind of jobs may I be able to look for, as I am not an English native? I'm already aware of the Japanese social environment, so on and so forth. Post-scriptum. I already lived in Japan for some time. I lived in Japan less than a year, and I had a 3-year relationship with a Japanese girl. Living together in Italy. I want your life. I didn't even look at the name. Ludovicio Trinci. That's an awesome name, dude. I think you kind of answered your own question here, man. You're a software developer, so I mean, if you needed to get your foot in the door, sure, you could come over and teach in the private sector because you couldn't do the public sector. But why not be a software engineer in Japan if you're interested to come over here? Because software developer jobs are incredible and pay well. And I mean, not as though you should neglect learning the language, but you get lots of these without having to know the language. There it is. Don't know why that took me so long to say. You don't need a mastery of the language. So yeah, there you go. That's cool. Coming out of Italy, eh? 3-year relationship with a Japanese girl. You beat me. Never had one that long. Okay, cool. Let's go. Writing from Michigan. I love it. I should say this. I love it whenever people say where they're writing from. So obviously Italy in the last one. It's cool. Like I'm like, whoa, mind blown always. To hear where everybody's like writing in from or catching the channel from. That's so cool. Do you have any insight for foreigners working jobs in Japan outside of teaching English? Since I first considered moving to Japan around 15 years ago, I don't know. I knew about an English teaching job, but the prospect never appealed to me. There is an avalanche of resources accessible to teach English. Okay, so I think this basically sounds like, what would I do? Okay, there it is. Too long, didn't read. Non-ESL jobs. Thank you, Mr. Trippin. Well, I've dedicated some time absolutely to discuss this. So I talk about software development. That's one of the things that you can do as an option, and that's great nowadays, especially because there's so many avenues to self-educate. So you can do that. The other option that you have is to be a priest and preside over weddings, and you can make a killing doing that. That's another option that you have. You have sales, but I would say that sales is pretty damn merciless here in Japan for like IT companies. They're not paying you too much. It can be pretty rough. Another option that you have is recruitment, recruiting people into jobs. I also hear that can be quite a shit show. So that's something that you could consider as well. But we got the software, we've got the priest, we've got the that last one I just said that I've now forgotten. And of course, if you're any kind of engineer or like skilled professional, as they call it, rightly, then you can come over into those positions as well. So that's something else you can do. If you were to get the language up high enough, tourism is another thing. Like there's like various jobs in tourism that exist as a possibility. Another sublayer, we'll say, that isn't exactly teaching but can be related to that is this is a really cool job. One that I think where I like, if I really continued, I don't know, I would consider this if I continued in the field of education. It's these international coordinators at universities. So you're no longer teaching, you're dealing with students that want to either live abroad from Japan or international students that are coming to study in Japan. And that's a really interesting job, and I'll tell you why. Bonus. It's because I found, and I've never been irritated by, I found that I really like when people are fresh off the boat coming to Japan. Some people sort of get inured to the experience of Japan, and they'll meet somebody like that, and it grates against them, like, oh, wait till you are disillusioned and you hate life like the rest of us, and it's bullshit. You don't need to live like that. Life is magical. And I really like that. And so I think if you were in a position in a university doing that, you're exposed to it all the time because you kind of have the awe of the Japanese students, these open-minded students who want to go live abroad. And then you have the awe and fascination of the arriving students. We live in a contrasting world, so a lot of them are going to be douchebags. But, you know, is that not needless to say? So once we take that in stride, pretty cool. So there's a few options for you. Thanks for the email, TJ. Let's move along. All right, just finished watching podcast 13. Cool. I enjoy the introspection, life philosophy. Oh, right on. That's what we're here for. I got the sense that you're interested in wanting to have kids of your own. Have you always wanted to have kids, or is this a more recent feeling? At what age would you estimate you want to have kids? I was an ALT for 1 year in Japan, loved it, and I returned home to Canada, fellow Canadian, cool. I'm 28 years old, in a relationship with my girlfriend and finishing up my degree soon, right on. I do not want to have kids, and I don't see my mind changing. However, the general consensus that I keep hearing is that a man's mind will change as he gets older. That's interesting. Have you always known you wanted kids, or has your mind changed over the years regarding wanting to be a father? I guess it's like I have kind of a weird subset of this thinking where I've always felt like I could give or take. I could have kids. I could not have kids. And most of that was relying on this reasoning that too many people have kids and they have that as a priority over the partner. And what it means is you'll end up with kids and a partner that you hate. And maybe that all comes out in the wash, and that's cool. And you'll just, like Louis C.K. says, you should get married so you can get divorced. But I never wanted to do that, so I was never in any kind of a rush for it, because I think actually, if you want to do it, well, for me, I thought it'd be cool if your partner was around. Both can work, obviously, no problem. But that was my reasoning to begin with. Which I'm not saying that that's 100% flawless, but what has changed is that I do, as I've accumulated personal experience in my life and wisdom, that I do appreciate more the idea of children, because I think so much of having kids, what is enjoyed in that is to pass something of yourself along. And what that requires for that to be interesting at all is to have something of yourself to pass along for which you are proud of or care about. And not to say that you can't have that at any point in your life, but the opportunity for that to grow in you as you've gotten older increases. So by the time that you are, I'm 35, I've had enough experiences and learned enough things that I think if I were to impart what I know or what values I have, that they would be better informed and there would be more there would be more net value for the child in what it is that I've taken from life at this point. And maybe there is also something biological in it, I wonder, because it's a chicken and egg scenario where like, is it because I'm older that I'm doing it, or is it because I want to do it more that I think that it's because I'm older? Where I used to not look at any sort of commercial, for example, that was geared towards parents, or the idea of like being a father meant nothing to me before. But then I'll sometimes get caught, watching one of those commercials, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty cool. If you had a fine son to raise and impart your wisdom upon, or a daughter to do the same. That I don't know exactly where that arises from, but I've done a lot of posts recently, whether on Instagram or talking about why I still live in Japan, where I'm totally at peace at this. And I mean, it seems kind of like the universally appreciated Uber opinion is that it's in your own time, and there's not one right way to do it. That kind of that thing we've all heard. So thanks very much for your question, Toby. Those are my reflections on it. All right, so let's go to... This is from Everardo Perez. Hey there, Dave. I recently became aware of your channel and really like it. Instafan. Right on. Thank you very much, Perez. And after 6 years of being away from college, I recently enrolled again. That's awesome. Very cool. We should never stop learning. In school, out of school. Educate yourself. It's good. It lit a fire and reminded of a dream I once had to be a teacher. Okay, there you go. I'm rambling. So what advice would you give to someone who has a dream to be a teacher in Japan? Okay, should we join Interact or Jet? Awesome. So same deal, Everardo Perez. Those first steps don't matter. Get yourself into the country. They're a stepping stone. It's a waste of time when you will probably, if you stay for any period of time, think or obsess over these minor first step details. You get into the country, and then you start to consider, what's your next step? Because all of these companies, to begin with, quite frankly, are one step removed from garbage. They're major contributing thing for, and I mean this in a career sense. They're just to get in the door. They're wonderful for like, now you're in the country and it's exciting and you're doing things. I don't mean to demean them in that sense. They're great in a lot of ways, but they're not worth this effort of obsession, which is usually surrounding money and career, when this first step has nothing to do with like how you might think of a career or define that. So don't sweat it. Move on quickly. That's my advice to people. Get here for a short period of time. Find something better. Okay. Let's see. Oh, wow. Okay. Hello. Commonwealthian. Very cool. Like the videos. Oh, right on. Patreon supporter. Thank you very much. Julie, I really appreciate that. Okay. A professional photographer the past 15 years at a primary or high school for the past 3 years, making me feel stagnated and bored. I have lived expat life before in Germany many years ago. That's really cool. I love living in a foreign country and experiencing brand new delightful things and connecting with fellow expats and locals. Let's get on. Okay, received a job from GABA. I know less about them. Anywho, let me get to the point. Leading up to the move, I kind of chickened out a bit, and as time wore towards leaving, I realized how much I'm over-attached to my life and surroundings, to the point where lately I'm in a constant battle about feeling anxious and indecisive, unnecessarily weak and fearful. I'm blessed to have a mortgage on a rather lovely house that I reside in alone. I started to freak out about the logistics. This is good. These are good emails. The emotion, the raw emotion. What would I do with my house? Clean out, store my material things, rent out, hoping the tenants wouldn't trash my beautiful home, or find someone I can trust and place a reduced rent with the issue of the less money? I would have to top up my mortgage using my already lame Kaiwa income. I hear ya. Underlying this was a sense of fear and uncertainty. Going forward, it's like the universe took the decision out of my hands. GABA postponed my job using the national emergency reason. Oh, okay. Which is on the one hand a relief, and on the other hand left me stranded in minimal work because of the crisis. So where do I stand? I'm trying to live in the present moment and let go to the wheel and allow things to flow. However, with the stuff that's going down at the moment, the general energy, I just feel anxiety and sadness about my future and a future of our planet. I try to help people around me the best I can so that their life will be easier, but in the quiet moments at home, at times I just can't distract myself like I used to, and like a petulant child with a thumb in the mouth. This is just good writing. I kick out and I cry, and I don't want to do adulting. I know there are a lot of other things a lot worse off than me. That only makes matters worse when I think of the world and the tragedies that are unfolding right now and into the future. Okay, and the risk of wasting my valuable time. It's so-so. I hope you will be gracious enough to answer my question. Was it difficult for you to let go of what was going on in Canada before you moved? I've made so many new words this episode. Moved. Leaving family, minimizing your life with possessions and home. This is a cool thought. You know what? We're actually going to go into overtime for this podcast because I so enjoy this question. Wow. Okay. Yeah. This question right here from Julie. I'm so glad I got to this. I'd love to. Oh, she gave me a link to her photography. So I'm definitely going to be checking that out. Okay. It's really important because I think the knee-jerk reaction of that, it seems like the Hallmark card, the thing that I'm supposed to say here, is that, forget this life, you're worrying too much, and abandon it all and come for the dreamland of Japan and this incredible experience that you can have over here. And that's exactly what I'm going to say. No, it's not. So first you asked me about myself, so that's what I'll answer. I'll answer like you asked me first, and then I'll go into my thoughts regarding you. So I did not have your experience whatsoever at all. So first of all, you have a home. You have some sort of like financial stability there. Well, I don't know if it's stability, but you have a home. You have that much assets that I didn't have at that time. And I was exactly at a point in my life where the number of glass ceilings that I'd run into in Canada, being a God-cursed art student, my prospects were not looking so good. I did not know what I know now about self-education in terms of, going into software development or something like that. And I had this kind of historical link to Japan that made me want to go. Now, sorry about that. We'll see how loud that showed up on the mic. I came over, and I also, not only that, I have an incredibly, incredibly supportive family in both my brothers, my mother, and my father. And they're all like, Dave, that sounds amazing. My dad is like a huge proponent, supporter of adventure and like my love of reading and camping and like just going out and doing crazy shit and experiencing new things. It's a lot credited to my dad for that reason. So not strange now that he would support me when I had come to Japan. So it was totally different to your experience. And the one thing that I talk about, which was, I suppose it's difficult, but I've also put this in context for myself as well, that it was okay. But I dearly missed, like you said, leaving family and friends. That was difficult for me, but I thought that, and knew, in fact, that it would create this new experience of returning to them after periods of time. And much like Odysseus stranded on his Odyssey, that to return home was this momentous, incredible occasion for me. And it has been for the last several times that I've done it, although I'm currently 2 years out from going home, and if things remain as they are, I won't be able to return, and my Odyssey will continue, but my fingers crossed that it won't. So that's my experience. It was mostly positive. I had that, but I had that kind of already in context for me that felt positive. Like I can handle this bittersweet melancholy because the contrasting experience of returning home to people is so incredible and profoundly enjoyable and filled with so much love that I really like the setup now. And all the people that I've come to love here and have become close friends that I know as well. But to your situation, I would look at it this way, where I don't know one thing that I can tell you, okay, let's address this first, is you just, the amount of worry that you have, I think that's ridiculous. And I won't throw any sort of profundities at you in terms of like, worrying does nothing to be useful. I just think, not just, I hate that. That's a justifying word. I'm quite certain that you have a variety of different things that are adding up. And when you are stressed, one stress leads to another, and another stress makes the next stress look larger. And I've been a huge advocate for this idea of don't let your current stress lie to you with its rationalizing. So we will, when we are stressed, rationalize in our minds things that are utter bullshit, and will make the world look so negative because we're so stressed. That is the only way in which we can think of the world, is through this negative lens. And the real demon in this is that we're still thinking, I'm going to do air quotes, thinking rationally. And that's the great lie, is that, no, I've looked at it from every angle, and I would look at this positively if I could, but like the rational, reasonable thought tells me that this is the negative outcome. But what you're doing is rationalizing under a negative mindset, and so you rationalize negatively. Perception is a hell of a drug, as I like to say. So making huge decisions while you're stressed is not very useful. Now, are you able to get to a place where you're not going to be so stressed? I don't know, because I think that there are a few things here that will dissipate. I can't downplay, because there's great suffering in the world right now, but all things pass. And I know, not certainly that things will get better, but things will change. And so don't rely necessarily on things getting better, but rely on the fact that things will change. And so if things feel negative for you now, at least allow yourself to see change and allow for change. And hey, if it gets shittier for you, well, then you're going to have to react. There is a certain degree of survival that kicks in at that point. But you may find that hypotheticals are what torments us. Whatever eloquent way that you want to put this, that we imagine every single negative scenario is not helpful to us. It's helpful for minimizing danger, and if there was saber-toothed tiger outside of your cave. But in terms of day-to-day modern life, like, what'll we do about the environment? Well, first needs to be addressed companies like BMW and Volkswagen and all these different mega companies that are putting like fake tests on their cars that allow them to pass emissions tests, where you are not going to be able to do much about that. So I don't mean to like say that it's nihilistic and it's out of your control, but there are certain things that you got to do things to the scale of that you can have an impact on. And what rationally is the use then of worrying about things that you have absolutely no impact on? When you talk about like crisis in the world, well, don't kill yourself with empathy. That's like, I'm not saying become a cold person, but I think that there's so much that can be done in our immediate community. Like you talk about caring about people and wanting to make a difference in their lives. Well, then let that be the thing that you focus on, as opposed to these extraneous, far beyond your pay grade issues that, quite frankly, you probably have no impact on yet until you start your empire. Then it kind of like, once we get outside of those, where I'm like, just think your way through these things. Can I make an impact on them? Yes, no, okay, fuck it, whatever. Forget those things. I can't impact them. Once you get back onto that, and then allow for the idea that things will change, where when we're stressed, time slows down and we imagine those 30 scenarios that are horrible. Just let the idea be that you're now like, not only are you imagining them, you're like imagining them on pause. You're imagining a negative outcome that does not end, where all things end. Even if they get worse and worse and worse, rarely, where in history ever at any time have things only got worse and worse and worse? They always got worse to a point, and then they got better. There was starvation in the Middle Ages that eventually had human meat in stalls in the markets. And then McDonald's. So eventually things get better. I can't guarantee, though, that they will necessarily be in your lifetime. Philip K. Dick, that author who did like The Man in the Tall Tower, do Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, that guy had such a tragic life. And like as he died, like 6 of his movies got made into films. And I was just like, yeah, damn, that's rough. So now we've moved back. We're peeling the onion here. But now we go back to this idea of your home. Now this is where you got to put on your big girl pants and woman the fuck up and make a decision for yourself. Like, if anything, I know you love your house, but it's also, think about this in this way. We'll put it in this context. Your house is a relationship. It's reliable. You spent time with it for years. You've maintained it. You've got something solid, stable, and reliable. But you know what? Is that what you need for the rest of your life? Solid, stable, and reliable? Maybe you want to go out and date the whore, the man whore, because you're a woman. You would, or who knows? I'm not sure what you're like. Maybe you want a whore. But the idea being that relationships can stagnate, but we would rather the devil we know than the devil we don't. And I would suggest that's probably why you're getting some of this anxiety as it relates to your home, because you think, oh, what'll I do with my beautiful home? But you know that there's something within you that's kicking now that's saying, I should get out and do something. And for the fact that you won't, that voice, that anxiety in your head is growing to say, you know that this is just stability that you're clinging to. And, well, we have examples in this conversation about everything. Nothing is immutable. And that is for your benefit and against it. So your house, you want it to be immutable. It's a symbol of that for you. The world is not immutable, or the world seems to be changing too rapidly for you. This is interesting. Now we're breaking down some cool stuff. We're on a wicked tangent. So your house being this like symbol of immutability, that it's reliable for you. Ooh, that's interesting. We could go here. And whereas the outside world seems to be changing too quickly, you look back at this thing and it's like, that's the stability, and the outside world is like changing too rapidly, and I don't like how it's changing. Well, realize I don't think that the house in your relationship will always stay the same. For example, that's why you're interested in going somewhere else. It's because that relationship with this house and this investment that you have is changing. It is not as immutable, stable, and reliable as you think, but it's a little safer than looking out the window and seeing all the things that's going on. So why I think the house ends up being like less of an issue is because if you found a good buyer, then you just have great liquidity. You sell this lovely house. And here's the other example I was going to make as it relates to a relationship. When we're in that stable relationship, that's so-so. It's like a 6 out of 10. I think that's what I may have been for the last relationship I was in before she booted me out. No. I'm a hot fire mountain. That can't be the reason. She's deluded. It's not me, it's her. But you've got this stability. It's a 6. You're kind of bored with it. But that devil you know rather than the devil you don't is this idea that you don't want to get rid of that because you can't imagine the more beautiful house that you would have, which is a major mistake. Like I had somebody who wrote me recently saying, I've been in this relationship for 10 years and I don't know if I can get out of it. Like I know nothing else. And I said, that's the point. That's why it's so hard for you, is because you cannot conceive of transcending this conventional relationship that you're in, like the conventional relationship that you have with your house. All that one need do to transcend any convention is to conceive of it. Now I'm quoting Cloud Atlas, but I love that movie. It's a fantastic, underappreciated gem. Absolutely amazing. And that's what I would conclude this thought with. I think the house is holding you back because there's other houses. And What do you want to just, you want to be old in that house one day? Yeah, it's beautiful. There's literally infinite beautiful houses in different places, but we're blinded by the fact that, oh, this is the one that I know and I don't want to go on the search to find it again. I don't know if you were like 80 years old. Actually, hell, no, if you were 80 years old, I'd be saying the same damn thing. I would be saying, really, really figure out what this relationship is that you have with this place that you were attached to, compared to this spark that you have to go out and explore. I think as a being that exists, we are a continuum. We're more than a continuum. Because the continuum's not quite the right metaphor. We're like a fountain, but here's a better description. We are a process. Much as we love stability and homeostasis, we are a process. And a process is a continually changing, evolving thing. And I think for the vast majority of us, whether we acknowledge it or not, we are at our best when we are existing as a process, and we start to stagnate and become bitter and things start to fall apart when we lose touch with the fact that we are this fountain, this thing that is ever evolving, ever changing. And that's where I think this myth comes from, where people say that, oh, sometimes I like to hurt because it reminds me that I'm alive. Well, I think maybe some people, chemicals reacting, how people would feel about that. But I think it's less to do with the fact that you just want to hurt yourself. It's more that you realize that we always kind of fundamentally crave to be a process, to be changing, to be experiencing, where when we become stagnant, we become we become able to predict every single day and every single moment of our lives ad nauseum, that we need that little bit of pain, because that pain is usually the spark that gets our process started again, us living like the thing that we innately are. I think this wins best email for its pure drama and emotion that I've received since starting the podcast. So thanks very much for that, Julie, and thanks as well for supporting me on Patreon. So I think we'll, in fact, close out with that detail. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. If you want to get your questions answered, that's going to be davetrippinon@gmail.com. Please do consider supporting me, as Julie has on Patreon, because that's how this channel survives and will continue to grow into the future. And I'm eternally grateful for it. Really appreciate it. You guys are awesome on Spotify. You guys are awesome on iTunes. You guys are awesome on the channel. I hope that you leave a comment. I hope that you leave a like. I hope that you subscribe and hit the bell so you can be let know as soon as a video goes live on the channel. That's all for now. The clock has run out.